Yeah, a long way from a stuttering kid. I didn't get enough love, now I'm... Welcome to another episode of the How Men Cry podcast. I'm your host, Dexter Spitz, and the How Men Cry podcast movement and mission is focused on making compassion contagious. We do that by changing the narrative around men's mental health and vulnerability, just by talking about the complexity of being a man in today's world. We're always looking to gather stories from different men in the community until we get to the magic number of 1,000 that we're looking for, and hopefully beyond. Today, it is my pleasure to bring on the good homie, new homie and friend, Sir Aaron. How you doing, man?
Hey, how you doing, brother, man? Good to be on the show. Appreciate you having me on, man.
Yeah, for sure. I was digging into some of the just amazing work that you've been doing and waves that you're making. I'll let you get into it all, but
Okay.
just want to say it's definitely a pleasure to be able to sit down with you and chop it up, man.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Likewise, bro.
Yeah. So yeah, would you like to just tell the good people at home who are you? And I like to extend that with, that can be what you do, but also just who you are as a person.
Yeah, no, definitely. Born and raised here, man. I'm a Chicagoan. Born and raised on the south side of Chicago.
Nice.
Um, Mid to '90s to early 2000s, kind of like the coming of age for me. I'm 40 years old, so that '90s kind of thing was much different than where it's at right now,
Yeah.
as you making attest to. But yeah, Chicago drug gang culture. Nevertheless, like my family, we always kind of value education.
Mm.
Um, so I knew that I always would kind of go to college. I always had like this hustler mindset, was always doing things to kind of make a few extra dollars. But that ambition kind of led me down the wrong path.
Yeah.
Eventually went to federal prison on a drug crime, and I spent almost a decade there.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
yeah, man, that kind of really defined my life. Also, the passing of my brother was like a defining moment too.
Mm.
So that's pretty much the crust of like where I come from, who I am. College graduate as well, father of one daughter who was born while I was incarcerated. So all those things kind of had, I would say, definitely an impact on my life
Yeah,
for
man.
sure.
Yeah, it's a hell of a story. And so, what is that? How does that inform the work that you do today? What kind of work are you doing today?
Well, I have the podcast which I started because of my stint in the system, called
Yeah.
Escaping the Odds, where I interview the formerly incarcerated who are now successful entrepreneurs. I just wanted to, as you're doing, change the narrative, and I want to do the same thing of what society thought about the formerly incarcerated and what people incarcerated kind of thought of themselves too. To
Hmm.
see somebody like, hey, you see me kind of doing my thing coming up. Hey, if Aaron can do it, I definitely can do it as well. Or one of these guests on my show can do it, I can do it as well. So that's what I do. So prison kind of reentry reform and using entrepreneurship as a way to kind of change the narrative and kind of change people thinking to switch hustles. Because I know
Yeah.
that's all that it sometimes takes, is just for somebody to kind of nudge them in another direction. So I do that. Most everything I do is related to criminal justice or reform type work.
Yeah. No, and that's dope. And it's honestly, I mean, it's super needed within the community. I know you were chatting with Audrey, but I was kind of saying that to her as well because to give even just my own, backstory, I definitely went through phases where that was
Yeah,
a very real possibility for me.
yeah,
And to be honest, I got lucky. I got lucky enough
yeah,
to not get caught in situations that I like looking back. I'm like, dog, that was,
yeah,
that could have ended a lot differently.
yeah,
And I've had a lot of friends, in those situations where, one of my best friends actually from that period in time. And I think what's complicated about it is, or what I've just seen, directly is like our society isn't really that welcoming for, if people have had like I was just saying a broad way, kind of like run-ins with the law,
yeah, for sure.
and there's no it's like they carry this like thing on people's record as if
Yeah,
it's like going to be the rest of what their life can do, and it
yeah,
makes every single step harder, which I'm sure I don't have to tell you, but
yeah.
just providing context.
Hmm.
And I've just seen and kind of witnessed that, so I'm just really honored and just proud to see that type of work being done. Hopefully we can find out ways to support and kind of collab on that too.
Yeah, no, for sure, man. It's definitely needed, man. I was talking to someone today, and real brief, just like oftentimes we hear about the recidivism rate, which is the likelihood of a person returning back to
Hmm.
some form of incarceration, but we don't really hear those success stories. And
Yeah.
so that's my whole platform, just success stories through entrepreneurship. Because most of the people that I was incarcerated with were locked up for some kind of economic crime, whether it was selling drugs, robbing a bank, cracking cars, whatever it was, right? They're trying to get some money. And so
Yeah.
just trying to help them change that mind so they can use that same skill set to do something different, man. But yeah, that's all we hear, man. So I just wanted to definitely be able to change that whole look.
Yeah, I love it, man. Because the way,
Yeah,
I mean, it honestly really is the way is like trying to represent the behavior and stuff that you actually want to
yeah,
see. Which is again a lot of the motivation even for our podcast is like you
hmm,
don't necessarily see men sitting down talking about more complicated topics. It's changing within the
yeah,
world's narrative. I would say is more common now.
yeah.
But yeah, and so kind of in that way, how do you feel like? What kind of narratives did you learn about being a man when you were growing up, and
Oh,
how do you feel about those narratives now?
yeah, man. Like the word masculinity,
Hmm.
just kind of playing off that word. I watched a documentary while I was incarcerated. It was called Masculinity, but it was with a K, like
Mm.
the mask that men wear. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like,
yeah,
so to answer your question, like you're told, like you know, men don't cry. You know what I'm saying? Or um, sleep with is be a womanizer. You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
Um, all these things make it cool. You know what I mean? Like to hang in with the in crowd. It's not cool to go to school or to be the quote unquote nerd. So all those different things kind of play on a person's psyche. So you become something that you weren't. That's not who you are. You know what I mean? And that's what happened to me because I wasn't operating in my true identity, but I didn't know it. It wasn't like I was trying to like put it on the front. It's just like this is what I had access to. This is what taught me this. But innately, I was a different person. You know what I
Mm.
mean? So when I went to prison, ironically, that's when I got back to the essence of myself,
Mm.
in there. And so being able to kind of look back like, oh man, like I don't have to be a womanizer. But it was so embedded in me for so
Oof.
long that
Yeah,
it's like it's hard to shake it. So even when I came home from incarceration, for a minute I was cool. You know what I mean? I wasn't being a womanizer, but then after a while I was like, oh, okay, so I'm back to my old tricks again
yeah.
because I wasn't practicing it and kind of staying on point with that. Got a
Mm.
whole lot better now for sure. But yeah, definitely, man. Like that's one of the main things that the narrative that was sold to us, especially as black men. You know what I mean? Coming
Yeah,
up in the hood, it's like as many women as you can slay. That's what it's about. You know what I
yeah.
mean? And so like right now, the music culture, it kind of perpetuates that as well.
Yeah, no, and I definitely appreciate you speaking to that, and even just the difficulty of, well, one, I mean, a couple things that's really powerful is, it sounds like even just taking that time in terms of like putting it to use, in terms of reflecting on who you were
Yeah.
and what's going on, and then trying to look into the world differently. And secondly, man, I can really resonate with how deeply ingrained some of the like narratives are. Like the more and more that I do this work, and probably the more and more self-aware I've been about just some of my own stuff. Like you're absolutely right. It's like, yo, where does half of this where does
Yeah.
half of this shit even come from? Like it's not even how you may feel about something. And what I've realized in recent times is like it ends up complicating or getting in the way of like um just relationships, just
Hmm.
being able to have safe and stable relationships, because you have these narratives that you're like
Yeah.
fighting against. It's like the version of you, and then it's all this other stuff you've been taught. So
Yeah.
I definitely resonate with that, man.
Yeah.
So congratulations on
Yeah.
flipping that script for yourself.
Yeah, for sure. And then kind of adding on to that, I almost kind of slipped my mind, but like even the violence,
Hmm.
what I'm saying, in our community, that's based around a narrative that we have to be this kind of a macho,
Mm-hmm.
don't let nobody play you, that kind of whole mindset. And so
Yep.
you have people that's doing a life sentence right now because they felt quote unquote disrespected
Mm-hmm.
by someone. And so, yeah, man, it's like it's really sending our young guys down this rabbit hole of the criminal justice system, and because of he looked at you the wrong way. You know what I'm saying? But
Mm-hmm.
again, that's that. This is I'm a man. Nobody disrespect me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, and I'm glad you spoke on that too, because I found myself having a hard time. Like, I feel like I'm in a constant battle. 'Cause my background, is making hip hop,
Yeah,
and even just being part of that culture, like performing the shows and whatnot. And I found it harder and harder and harder to to be in agreement, because I'm like a lyricist, write a lot of
yeah,
poetry, spoken word. So it's really hard for me. Like, most people hear the beat and that captures them, but it's actually really hard for me to not hear the lyrics. So it's amazing, because, and I don't want to demonize anybody's form of
yeah,
artwork or anything like that,
for sure.
but there's definitely parts of the culture that perpetuate or celebrate or speak about things so much that I think it kind of gets woven into how we see ourselves.
Yeah, no, definitely, man. And hip hop is really, again, that's part of that whole being a hip hop artist nowadays, right? You have to have this facade, you know what I mean? This tough guy, and again, that's what sells, unfortunately, in our society. You know what I mean? You can't be yourself,
Yeah.
or if you are yourself, you looked at, like a weirdo.
Yeah. So how do you, I guess, so how do you, relate to, maybe, I guess, like now you being a father or doing so much work with just so many members within the community, how do you find and then stay true to that self that is Aaron now? Like, what gives you the confidence to kind of walk in that?
Yeah, just man, that's a great question, man. I think it's just being okay with being who you are, and just like accepting, like, this is who I am. Sometimes you got to be bold. Like, hey, you don't like it, this is what it is. And it's just that confidence that you have to have, and just kind of knowing yourself, and just being true to yourself. Because at the end of the day, I read a quote. It said something to the effect of, like, if you realize, like, how many people will forget about you after you're dead, then you wouldn't be too pressed on that. They didn't use that word, but you wouldn't be too
Yeah, yeah,
on really impressing people. You know what I mean? Because look at people like Kobe Bryant, right? He died a couple years ago, maybe a year ago, right? Like, you don't hear nothing else about it, right? Maybe, of course,
yeah,
his family still mourns, but at the end of the day, like, he was this big iconic figure. So what are they gonna think about me? You know what I'm saying? Or you?
yeah,
You feel me? And so it's just a matter of, like, if you think like that, it's like, okay, let me just be me. Or even better yet, this is maybe another tool or a way to kind of think about it. Like, when you want to impress someone, right?
hmm,
Maybe you can ask yourself, will this person be at my funeral?
yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
To be honest with you, there's some people, man, that you can probably think of, that you probably deal with, like, they may not pop up. They may have to work that day. They might not take off. You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
Right?
Nah,
And
straight up.
so just to kind of put things in the context, like, to really have a person look at it. So those are some of the things you can think about. Like, okay, man, I ain't finna be impressing this person, or this group of people, right? When I know that this is gonna be the situation, let me just go ahead and do me. And so, to
Yeah,
answer your question, that's one of the ways I can look at it, or anybody can kind of think about it.
yeah.
Staying true to themselves.
Yeah, and it's taken me a lot of time. I still work on that, like, to get
Yeah,
more and more comfortable with it, because I think even for me, part of how I've existed in so many ways has always been like a little bit on the, like, fringe, I think, of how, some, like, more of the masses move. And that's been something that I was internalizing as such a, like, negative thing, where to have those points of view of being different or whatever it is. But yeah, you're right. And it becomes more freeing in a way, like,
yeah,
once you can really sit in that.
yeah,
So all of this really brings me to the thought of, like, how do you regulate your mental space? You know, what do you consider mental health? And I guess maybe how has that what has your storyline of like mental health been like? Because it sounds like you're very thoughtful and deliberate
Yeah.
about yourself. So I'm just curious of that path through different stages in life.
Yeah, man, that's another dope question, man. As I'm thinking about like my incarceration was a big part of my life. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
defining like who I am today. The man you sit in front of you now is like because of that situation. Not the system itself, but just because I had that time to sit down and kind of reflect. And part of that reflection was like mental health, right? Like
Yeah.
so how I regulate like what I used to do while I was away, like I did like every day I did something spiritually, mentally, and physically, like to keep
Mm.
myself on point. You know what I mean? And I realized that most of the time, like when we conjuring up these stories in our mind, because like for me, that's where my mental health was affected at, like thinking about what was going on out here. You know what I mean? Like then your emotions get wrapped up in it and the whole nine. And so just kind of like putting things in perspective, like telling yourself that this is just all your thoughts. You know what I'm saying? Like you creating a whole movie up here. You know what I mean? It's not even like you got whole cast and the whole nine, and so
Tell me about
and you and you work yourself up. You know what I mean? And then those emotions get involved, and then before you know it, now your emotions is attached to your physical being. Now you're sick, and so I speak to that because I went through that while I was
yeah.
away, thinking about certain things, and so to regulate that, it's like you got to put things in perspective, like in check. Like I'm a man of faith as a Christian. It's like you have to renew your mind. You know what I mean? And so for
Yeah.
me, like one of the things that helped regulate was like me reading my word. You know what I mean? Finding that solace, if you will, in those characters in the Bible because I saved myself in those people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's how I did it.
Yeah. No, that's awesome, man. And I think I like that idea of just kind of it sounded like you would balance and just recenter at different points. And
Yeah.
that's an awesome thing to kind of find. Do you feel like you had mentorship that kind of led you towards that, or was that something that you more so just recognized within
Yeah.
yourself and then developed a need for?
I believe it was both.
Yeah.
It was definitely those epiphanies that you have. Again, going back to my faith, it's like when you read any kind of book, you kind of like stuff just get to popping out. Your mind goes to like a rabbit hole. You just kind of thinking one thought leads to the next. And um, so it's part of that. Just my own thoughts within myself, but then also having men around me that were like strong men in their own like own mental health and really positive thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of definitely helped. So I would
Yeah.
say I would say 50-50 for sure.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And that's what men need out here. Is like oftentimes we don't. Again, I reflected back on my time away because that was so pivotal in my life. Um, and there, I had that more so than I have out here because you're busy with life
Mm.
out here. And then also out here, you don't really have the time like to be around other men like every day, all day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like men's groups and stuff like that. Because you
Yeah.
got to take care of the family and blah blah blah. But I got a lot of my mental health, and I didn't even look at it like that. I was just kind of like just trying to be a better person, personal
Yeah.
development. I looked at it. I didn't call it mental health, but as I look back, like that's what I was
That's
doing.
what you
I
was.
was I
Yeah.
was I was training my mind.
Yeah, and that's actually that's a very fascinating point from the standpoint of like there's a sense of community that maybe you had there that could actually help and like encourage some of that
Yeah,
because you're right, like when you moving
yeah,
through the here and there. I mean, even just in terms of something as simple as us, sitting down to have a call to schedule. It's like, all right, does it work on so and so calendar to do this?
there
We
you
got
go.
this,
Yeah, right.
and then that's forget bringing together 10 men to actually talk
Yeah,
about what's going on.
yeah.
It makes me think or wonder like what are misconceptions that you think pop up around being like around being incarcerated and maybe some of the things that you've witnessed, or I don't want to say like positive necessarily, but like how do you feel like people misinterpret like the circumstance that you've gone through?
Um, I think that for some people, they may feel like a lot of people there like deserve to be there.
Hmm.
There are some people that's supposed to be there. Don't get me wrong, you know what I mean. But there are a lot of good dudes and a lot of good women that kind of just made one mistake, two mistakes, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And I think that we don't look at the context of why a person was incarcerated. You know what I mean? We just see that they're arrested, they're locked up. You know what I mean? We don't kind of go beyond that. And
Yeah.
I mean, why would they? You know what I mean? And most people kind of believe, okay, if you're locked up, you're supposed to be there. You know what I mean? They're not going to go deep into it and understand why. Look at the circumstances around that reason why that you're there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say that's one of the misconceptions. You know what I mean? That everybody there is like, okay, you deserve to be there. Do your time and shut up. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Also, that people that are there are like a waste of life. Uh,
Mm.
I've met some of the most ingenious men in my life. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
they like super creative. I would say my creative juices really was flowing while I was there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I had so much time to myself and sit down and be one with myself and be one with God. It's like I've came up with escaping the odds while I was there. You know,
Yeah.
I've been creative, but I don't know if I would have come up with that on the outside. You know, just because
Yeah.
of all the distractions. I think also too I will definitely want to speak to that. It's like the homosexuality stuff, right?
Mm.
I remember when I was first getting out, and I would meet women, and I would tell them how long I went to prison for. Oh, for one, another misconception is that I would tell them I was in prison for almost a decade. They assume I murdered someone.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it was kind of a violent offense, like no violence. You know what I mean? Like strictly drugs. They were like, "What?" Like, you know, they was shocked by that.
Yeah.
That's a misconception. But going back to the homosexuality thing, like women will actually like, have you ever, had any kind of? I'm like, no, you know what I mean? Like that's not even, I took offense, but at the same time, I kind of understood because that's what they see on TV.
That's what people.
Like,
Yeah. That's the
yeah, that's what
present.
what they associate with. But at the end of the day, I would tell people like it's more accepted out here than it is in there. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
probably only a percentage, and nothing against that community. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's like it's probably only a few percentage wise over the whole. At least outwardly. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Opposed to like how it is out here. So those are some of the misconceptions I would say.
Yeah.
And then a person can be rehabilitated as well. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
I don't even know if I want to use that term, but like a person
Nah. Yeah.
can
It's a
change, yeah,
loaded term, but I get you. Yeah.
yeah, just kind of change their mindset, and that's not true.
Yeah. And I appreciate you speaking to all of it really because it really just shows how. I mean, in a more broad conversation. I mean, one like I'm sure that was a lot to have to witness, for you personally. Just all that's to me when I just hear the complexity of your story, I could just imagine all the different ways that you must have been pulled or
Yeah,
pushed at different times, and it's awesome to me that you found these ways to like kind of level out and keep your mental space cool. Because, but secondly, it just makes me think of like how we will grab on to stories or to ideas and then we just continue to project that on the people or in the situations, and that's what I think has bothered me whenever I've seen or just kind of like witnessed friends who have a situation where maybe they made a mistake or maybe they had this and that happen within their life, and then you have all these other circumstances of like, well, yeah, but this kid or this young man or young woman was also abused for
oh, yeah,
like crazy amounts of time, didn't have any resources, literally couldn't keep the lights on. Like there's so many complexities, and I think one of the things in general that I've been working on doing less and less of is like making one connection to something
yeah,
being what
it
somebody
is.
else is going to be, and I don't care what the thing is. I don't care if it's you white, you black, you like
Yeah,
male, woman, like queer, straight. I don't care what it is. This idea of we're going to take this one piece and then we're going to blanket the
yeah,
rest of who you are.
yeah.
I think is one of the worst things that we do as people,
Yeah,
honestly.
I think that's just easy to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, otherwise, you gotta think. You know what I mean? Nobody want to think, man. You know what I mean? It's easy to just
Yeah.
kind of throw a blanket indictment on it and kind of just run with it. Be like, all right, cool. And kind of puffs up your own ego. You feel like you got that right. You know what that is. it's really much deeper than that.
Yeah. No, yeah, I appreciate you speaking to it.
Yep, for sure.
So how do you see, I mean, do you, from the work that you've been doing, do you see, you know, those narrative changes, or how does it, or maybe even another part would be, how does it feel to kind of be leading, you know, efforts? I mean, like, you really have taken so many things in your life and have just turned it into such a positive, I mean, powerful thing. How does that feel to just witness even for yourself?
Yeah, man. Sometimes, like my mom would tell me, like, "Hey, you should be really proud of yourself. Like, have you thought about everything you accomplished over the last 3 years since I've been home?" And actually, be 3 years next month.
Wow.
And it's almost like a ball player just balling. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like he just doing what he do. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
he's not really thinking about it. I'm on to now. I'm very ambitious. So I'm on to the next thing, and that's a good thing. It's a bad thing, right?
Hmm.
But like I don't really sit in my moments. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like reflect on that question. Like somebody such as yourself have to. Now I'm thinking about it. You know what I mean? But a lot of time I'm kind of just going to the next thing, and that's not I have to work on that. You know what I mean? And kind of pat myself on the back, and give myself that moment of like, okay, man, you kind of doing your thing, with that. And so far as like one leading in this area, definitely feels good. I could see the narrative changing.
Hmm.
Like even with the young lady, that I'm dating, I'm like. She's like, everybody that you, all your friends, like formerly incarcerated. I was like, yeah, pretty much everybody. You know what I mean? But she was like, all of them like doing awesome things. I was like, yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, what you expect? You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
uh, so I get that. I definitely get that. So people are like with my platform, they're kind of just seeing like, oh wow, okay, this person like he runs like $1 million company, you know what I mean? He was
Yeah.
in prison for it, you know what I mean? Or he's a motivational speaker, like a different array of things, just even from like the business standpoint of
It's
just
awesome,
create.
man.
Yeah, so I'm saying that, but even also because I do work at the county too, at Cook County, as a safety justice challenge, doing like a
Hmm.
community liaison, and even with that, it's like um, I get a chance to kind of be on calls with people that's making decisions,
Hmm.
and there are some things that's being changed, the way that they are looking at like sentencing and things of that nature.
Good.
Uh,
Yeah.
so the culture is changing. You know what I mean? I don't know if it's because it's costing money or or you know what I mean. It's in their heart to
Or because
do it. You know?
probably if I had
A
to
little
guess,
bit of
it's
both,
probably
right?
a little
Yeah, a
bit
little
of
bit of
both.
both of them.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? But
the money
yeah,
usually motivated.
yeah, absolutely, man. So it's
Yeah,
about that bottom line. But yeah, the narrative is much different than what it was 15 years ago for sure.
yeah, and that's dope to hear because honestly, like I said, I have a complicated outlook towards a lot of things within
Yeah,
the like justice system. Is too, even in my personal story, kind of too much to to kind of delve into in one convo, but definitely, like I was mentioning before, is like a big point of frustration is, you know, is there's a reality of if you don't got the money or if you don't have the right, you know, defending the right whatever else,
yeah,
outlooks are just entirely different. And so it's just it's dope that, you know, I mean, you're really doing like ground floor work, and I want to, you know, celebrate that, you know, for you. So that's just really dope to see, man.
yeah. I
Really,
appreciate
really
that,
dope
bro.
to see.
Definitely, you
Yeah.
did that, man.
So how so I guess a few questions. I'm trying to think of where to even start with it. When we're talking about, how do you relate to the word like vulnerability, and how, like you spoke before, of there being moments or times or outlooks towards needing to show or have bravados, you know, that
Yeah,
maybe are ones of protection and stuff. Like, what does the word vulnerability mean to you, and how does that relate to your life where it is now?
man. Vulnerability to me it means like surrendering to
Mm,
your inner self, your inner being, your emotions. You know what I mean? Just kind of like just being really authentic with yourself. For years, I wasn't able to be vulnerable because I think it was just, I don't know, I could say it was part of my personality. I could say it was part of my environment and all that or whatever, right? Or just me being stubborn. or whatever. But as I got older, I've been learning to be more vulnerable. Like even now, like with my own story, you know what I mean? Like I do all these stories of people on my podcast, and um, I'm finally telling my story on the
Yeah.
next season. You know what I mean? And so that's being vulnerable. You don't
Yeah.
want the prejudgment. Even just always been a private person.
Yeah.
So for me to even be doing the work that I'm doing now, it's nothing but God, bro. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Like,
He like,
like I couldn't, yeah, I couldn't be doing, what I mean, this without, just kind of like the motivation to push behind with him. But yeah, just kind of just again, that's surrendering,
yeah.
being open and just not like kind of fearful of what to be judged. And I think I'm gonna be honest with you though, man. I think that today's society is a lot the youth are more vulnerable than I
Yeah.
don't know how old you are, but um my era, like we weren't vulnerable at all.
Yeah.
I mean, like it was like that's weakness, like to show any
Yeah.
kind of, you know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
But now it's like they who they want to be, or at least it's what it looks like. You know what I mean? They're wearing, pink hair, blue hair, gray hair. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
like they're them. You know what I mean? They're
Yeah.
speaking truth and truth to power, and I definitely can appreciate that about the generation. But to me, vulnerability is like just surrendering that inner emotion.
Yeah. And I mean, I totally agree with that. I'm kind of right on that cusp
Yeah,
of, I think I grew up, the way that I grew up was definitely in a more like, these are the,
freedom.
yeah, well, I grew up with, as that conversation I would say has been changing.
Um,
I'm in my 30s now. Like I just got to, it's I've been able to kind of witness it change, but definitely when I grew up and like more of that, like the 90s, like
yeah,
2000s, whatever, the narratives were way
yeah,
stronger on, the
definitely.
side of like, you know,
Man
so
up.
yeah, I mean, pretty much. That was pretty much the tone of like
Yeah,
everything. And it's still, I think what's tricky is like you can fool yourself into thinking that that's how everything is, but it really isn't. I think sometimes you can get into networks and environments where it's more common,
yeah,
but there's still a lot, a lot of stuff out there. So when we talk on just the podcast and this whole conversation about crying, we don't necessarily mean, physical tears of crying.
yeah,
I mean, that's part of the conversation too,
yeah,
but we talk about just the many different ways that you can cry out
yeah.
personally. Some of those things can be positive. You might have a moment where you need to vent something out and you go work out or exercise or write
Okay.
something down.
Mhm.
But um, in theory, because of how we're socialized, sometimes I think it can be more difficult to have other means of crying out that can be negative,
Mhm.
violence, self harm, all those types of things. So I just want to pose a question to you, and it's kind of, you can go with a couple ways, you can answer both. But
Mhm.
one is like, are you comfortable with sharing a story about a time that maybe you've had to cry or show vulnerability? And then, a second part of that question could be, are there other ways that you feel you've cried out in life that maybe wasn't physical tears?
Yeah, I can answer the latter.
Hmm.
Um, as I look back, I talked about womanizing.
Hmm.
Um, and I actually had to bring this to my attention. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, I believe that's how I cried out, like through dealing with women. You know what I mean? Coming up. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I think that was one way. But that was like I felt like that was positive. You know what I mean? I was getting some kind of gratification out of it. With that. Um, and to the other question, what was the first part of that?
And just a time of maybe a
Um,
time that you could remember crying
yeah,
or just showing vulnerability in general.
yeah. I could say I just cried yesterday. Like cried, like a good
Yeah.
cry. I needed it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like a good friend of mine was in a bad car accident. Like it was
Oh
one of
man.
my best friends, like from back in the day. You know what I mean? But I went to prison. We kind of lost, distance or whatever. But we still kind of stayed in touch with each other, like through social media or whatever. And I was just talking to him, talking about him. not in a bad way, just kind of
Yeah.
mentioned some things we kind of went anyway. But then I found out he was in a bad car accident like 2 days ago, and
Oh
like
man.
fight for his life, the whole nine.
Oof.
I'm like, wow, you know what I mean? So I was just talking to his mom on the phone, just like crying, like, wow, like, and I hadn't cried in a while, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, and outside of that, like with my daughter, definitely like, because I was gone out of her life, all of her life, because of my
Mm.
incarceration. She was born while I was incarcerated, and so just just kind of having conversation with her in the past about like my feelings of being, like my regret of being away and not being in her life uh,
Yeah.
during that time as a, as a father, whatever, right?
Mm.
Yeah, so I definitely was vulnerable then and really cried on, for sure.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing both of those circumstances, and honestly, I mean, that takes a lot of courage. I think in that situation, especially with your daughter and stuff, and just kind of owning up to that, because I'm sure that wasn't difficult. Not, I can only imagine not being
Yeah,
able to build that relationship when
for
you
sure.
when
Yeah.
you want. How do you think that vulnerability helped y'all's relationship, like between you and your daughter, or your parenting and stuff?
I believe it has. It allows me to kind of also like look at things like from her perspective,
Yeah,
and so, and not just only just think about like what do I gain out of the relationship. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
My daughter, just kind of, yeah. So I think it has.
yeah.
Still a
That's
lot of work
all.
to do though, but definitely has worked.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. That's really dope.
Yeah,
And even I get you even on the standpoint of, I think, difficulty with like women. Like,
yeah,
I've definitely had my issues in that arena. Just in terms of like, to be real blunt, I mean, I done been an asshole. I think a lot of us have been
yeah,
been responsible, in terms of I don't want to make any kind of excuse or anything, but I think it culturally, you kind of spoke to it before. I mean, we really it has taken me some time to realize how deeply ingrained the narratives that then become your thoughts and outlooks are. And when
hmm,
I've been looking at, what an actual healthy relationship is, which is like communicating with
right,
with the partner, talking about what's bothering you, all these types of
yeah,
things. I'm like, we ain't learned none of
yeah, right, yeah,
that. Like,
yeah,
so it's almost crazy to kind of look back now. And yeah, I'm glad to see those things changing within the culture.
yep,
But yeah, I think a lot of men, whether we would want to admit it or not, I think that's what ends up happening is like, you're taught, all right, well, you just go sleep with a bunch of women, or you just go
yeah,
do this and do that, and that's supposed to make you feel better, and
yeah.
it don't really work.
No, not at all. For the moment, it does, right?
Yeah, so yeah, but I appreciate that. It's just a lot of that is takes a lot of bravery to discuss. So
Yeah, no, for sure.
so where do you see now? Just a couple more questions in closing. Like, what do you feel like the world can use more of from men within the community?
Mentorship, like giving access to other men that may not have access to whatever that may be. You know what I mean? It could be business. It can be just being a father. You know what I mean?
Mm,
All those things. Kind of like a big brother, but in that kind of an aspect of it. Again, I didn't really have access till I went to prison. You know what I mean?
yeah.
What I mean by that is like access to different people, of men that I wasn't, they weren't a part of my spirit influence. You know what I
Mm,
mean? Until I went away, ironically, Um, and so I would say that for sure.
yeah.
Definitely to have access to mentorship from people that not always even just look like you. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Or been from where, like, come from where you come from, because a lot of times you get caught in that echo chamber. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
So to kind of be around some people that kind of have some different viewpoints on life, and it allows you to be vulnerable. You know what I mean? Because you got to talk about some things that with someone else. Like I just think about my own experience, like talking to people that was incarcerated, like middle-aged white man from New York that's a millionaire, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like his views on inner city America. You know what I mean? So you gotta, you know what I mean, and just kind of just having that communication and dialogue. So, but I looked at it like mentorship, though.
Yeah.
And so I definitely, I think that's one of the biggest resources we need in a community or in the world right now.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I
At
totally
least
agree with
one
that.
of them, not the biggest, but definitely it's on the list for sure.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that because you're right. When I look at it, um, it's a strange connection to make. But I was looking at this thing about birds, and they were saying how they think the assumption is that birds kind of come out with this like innate knowledge of how to fly.
Mm.
But I guess some further studies, and don't quote me on this if I'm wrong. All right, this is just for example
Yeah,
purposes. Don't hit me up later being like, well,
yeah,
technically in this scientific paper, but that they were saying that there's actually a series of time that even with these birds are born with wings. In theory, they would have some concept or idea. There's like a period of time that the parents, at least in some species, are like showing different like movements of wings, like different attempts, all types of little things that actually are encouraging them and kind of readying them for that point of like jumping. And when I think of it in community, sometimes they're just
yeah,
looking at us like mentorship wise,
yeah,
sometimes we just got kids out here.
yeah.
It's
That's it.
just out here.
Yeah,
And then it's like, all right, well, why aren't you being productive, or why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? I'm like, where would this magical,
information
like
come from. Yeah,
higher level thought come from?
yeah,
I'm like, how much wild shit were you doing at 15? Like
yeah,
where, like where's this knowledge gonna come from?
yeah,
Unless people are really present. So I just fully agree with the mentorship, and that's even within adulthood. Like it doesn't
yeah.
just stop in
No, for
in,
sure.
in
It's
youth.
forever.
So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, appreciate you
Like a
speaking to that.
like mentors, like a mentor, like a
Yeah,
tour through life. You know what I mean?
yeah.
That's how I kind of think
That's a
about
brilliant way to put it.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then last but not least is, how does the world help men to get to that point? How do we help men get there?
Mm. I would say by just not being judgmental. You know,
Yeah,
I think as men we have like this testosterone. You know what I mean? We don't want to feel like someone's making a fool of us or you know looking at us negatively. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
um, just having that space, some
yeah,
kind of space where it's okay and a comfortability where we can be vulnerable and kind of chop it up and not be uh not be prejudged or ostracized or ridiculed for our thoughts and whatever. I
yeah,
think that's key.
yeah. And I totally agree with that too. I think it's quite difficult sometimes to feel you need that encouragement. If you kind of jump out there in a vulnerability way. It helps, to
Yeah,
have that extra little level of
yeah,
encouragement. And I agree, just taking down some of the guards to see people
yeah,
as they are, man. So
yeah, that's for sure.
yeah. No, man, I really appreciate the conversation, just all of the jewels, the gems. It's really, just fascinating to hear your perspective. I know we got further stuff set
Yeah,
up for us to chat.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and I appreciate Audrey. I'm always shout out Audrey on here, but for just making connections and
Oh yeah,
seeing,
man. She's super dope, man.
yeah, and seeing pathways. And I think to your point, I think we can. I'm really curious to just continue to have
Yeah.
conversations and just build, man. Because
Yeah,
I'm
no,
inspired.
definitely. Let's for sure, man. Let's definitely do it, man, and set some things up and make it happen, bro. Ain't nothing to it.
Yeah, so sounds good. And listen, I just want to thank you again for your time. Is there any you want to drop?
Yeah,
Any plugs, places for people to find you, any of that good stuff?
yeah, absolutely. Escaping Oz podcast, interviewing formerly incarcerated, redemption, entrepreneurship, business leaders, that were formerly incarcerated. And so now they're doing their thing now. The third season is dropping on February 8th. You can go back into the catalog and check out the previous 2 seasons, probably like 50, 60 stories there on YouTube as well. escapingodds.com. Also, I just partnered with an online bank called Stretch Finance. So we kind of put some things together with that. I got a trucking company as well, hiring formerly incarcerated to kind of get their learn the game with trucking,
Yeah.
and kind of legitimize what they're doing. So
Yeah.
that's what I got going, man. And just kind of looking forward to the new season. Continue to get these stories out. Catch me on Instagram, Escaping the Odds. I'm everywhere, so just plug it in. You probably find me.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Thank you. And yeah, please take a look, listen to some of those episodes, listeners, and we can continue to change all of these narratives for the better. And I'll just say for the How Men Cry project, you can always find more at howmencry.com or How Men Cry on IG. Always looking for guys to submit stories. You can do so now in video form, audio form, written form. It can even be anonymous. You ain't even got to say nothing about who you are. Well, we just want the stories and be able to show this conversation differently. So thank you again, Aaron. I appreciate everything that you shared today. It just further solidified just how important the work you're doing is. So thank you, man.
No, thank you, man, for having me on and being a great interview.
Oh yeah,
really thought-provoking questions, man, to kind of help me pull it out. I had to dig deep. You know what I mean? So, I appreciate your skill set.
For sure, man. I try to not go too far, but I be trying to get in there, get into the good stuff.
That was perfect, man. Perfect.
All right, man. Well, you take care. I'm gonna kick us out of here, and thank you again for the time.
Yep, no doubt, bro. Talk to you soon, man.
All right, peace.
Yeah, a long way from a stuttering kid. I didn't get enough love, now I'm